Hi guys, if you've got an older vehicle and you're thinking about getting more power, I'm just going to touch on a few things that you might want to consider. So we've got the Mighty Kettle here. This has gone through a few configurations, and a lot of these things I'll touch base on and compare it to a couple of other common older four-wheel drives such as your 80 series and 100 series. So before you get all the exciting stuff like your turbo upgrades, intercoolers and exhaust, the maintenance is what you've got to get out of the way. So assuming your engine is in a good health condition as far as blow-by, head gasket isn't leaking and whatnot, the first common things that we would discuss is overhauling your injectors every 90 to 100,000 Ks on mechanical setups. Valve clearances, if you've got a TD, the rocker shafts are prone to wear, the silver tops, the tappet faces are prone to wear, so you'll want to make sure that you actually inspect that when you're setting them, and that goes for your 24 valves as well. And then the third thing I'd mention is the pump. If it's got a 300,000 K pump, we can tune it, but you can't expect optimal results. The housing gets worn, the timing advance piston, the transfer pump, the heads on the pumps, they're not going to produce sufficient case pressure, the internal timing's not as good. So if you come down and you've got an old pump and you want it tuned and you don't get the exact result, like your mate might have more power, it's got worse opacity, black smoke at the same air fuel ratio, all of this can be from pump wear and all those other things we talked about. We generally will not tune your car unless the injectors and the valve clearance have been done, and obviously do your research. For instance, if you've got a 24 valve, the inlet manifold gaskets at high Ks will get done at the same time as that top tune and bits and pieces like that. Now from then on in, obviously a lot of these older vehicles are unintercooled, so a decent intercooler and exhaust system doesn't go amiss. I know on your 1KZs and on your 12 and 24 valve cruisers the exhausts are very restrictive, and even if you're not going to put it on the dyno, intercooler exhaust, valve clearances, pump overhaul, that is a great upgrade. Now the front mount intercoolers do give you far better air density and lower inlet air temps. However, on the TDs and the cars like the 1HZ indirect injected motors, they do have major overheating issues. Running a front mount intercooler will give you at least around 10 degrees on your water temp, and most of the time of your towing you cannot afford that. So on this particular vehicle, it does have a top mount. It is not optimal performance wise from a power point perspective and a air temp control. However, if you've got a relatively high duty cycle application, these cars, putting anything more in that front stack does cause far higher water temps, and you'll see there's an enormous electric fan just here. It's about that big. It's probably about 3 times as powerful as any of the Chinese ones people put on, so you'll have to remove that, and you're going to have intercooler, air conditioning condenser, radiator, potentially an aftermarket transcooler, and along with your lights and winches and everything like that, that can give you a massive dead zone and cause extremely high water temps. So on an indirectly injected motor that's going to do higher duty cycle, we generally would go top mount, depending on the application. If it's all out power and you don't have aircon and whatnot and it's a weekend toy, then a front mount may be more beneficial. Now from then on in, obviously these vehicles on the dyno in turbo format are 60 to 70 horsepower at the tyres. We would generally do intercooler exhaust on a stock turbo at 14 pound booster to make about 130, 135 horsepower, and the torque would go from around 250 to 350 newton meters. Some of them are as low as 175 newton meters. This application with the intercooler and exhaust, and I have monitored the cylinder pressures and the exhaust temps, you will get a full service life out of this vehicle at 14 pound boost. It'll do hundreds of thousands of Ks. You're not likely going to reduce the life stuff all because the intercooler is going to have dropped the inlet air temps massively, and same with reducing exhaust restriction and whatnot. So it's going to be fairly reliable, and same goes with cruisers. If you have a stock or very small turbo, low boost, you've intercooled it, free flow exhaust and whatnot, you're going to have a full shelf life. I've done 100 series at 120,000 Ks that have now done 700,000 Ks, and a lot similar with 24 valves and whatnot. There's a few kicking around in New Plymouth with 1.2 million on the clock, and they've just might have just had 5 sets of injectors over the time and whatnot. So if you do start to go further on this platform, and this vehicle had that stage 1, the guy got sick of it and he went to a refreshened 11mm pump with a cam plate and just a little 44mm turbo, and there is a far higher torque output, higher cylinder pressure, it's harder on the head gaskets, it's more load on the cooling system. He didn't have any reliability issues, and about 4 or 5 years down the track, and now we've gone even further again, and he's put a G Turbo Titanium, which is a far more modern turbo. We're making similar torque numbers because the bigger turbochargers move the torque up in the power band. However, we've got another 60 horsepower more again. Now what that might look like from a cylinder pressure perspective and a torque output is, you've got to remember the crankshaft's got to handle that, the head gasket's got to seal, and it's probably done about 300,000 Ks, and the cooling system has to get rid of that heat. So at these kilometres, there are plenty of guys that have had, 200, 250 horse TDs, and they say it's been like that for 7 years. But if at this point you've got triple the torque output of factory and the back drops off the crank, or it lifts the head and you have to do studs and a new head and you're spending 7-10 grand, you've got to be realistic about that. So if you are stretched for budget, and a lot of these guys are going straight to wanting the turbo and intercooler, yet they haven't done inlet manifold, gaskets, injectors, the cooling system's not in good service, you really want to think about how that might look. And we get that a lot with 1KD guys. They've got a bad piston design flaw, and they haven't done their injectors, and it's done high Ks and they can't afford to do them, but they want to tune. Is it worth tuning it at that point? Because when it breaks, which it will at 380,000 Ks on the original injectors, if you can't afford to do the injectors now, what's it going to look like when you're in for a full engine rebuild? So think about how far you're going to stretch that rubber band. Think about your duty cycle. So duty cycle is, if you're towing massive loads and your foot's hard on the floor, the exhaust temp for a prolonged period of time is far worse than a higher exhaust temp for a short period of time. So think about that like a map gas. If we get a 250 horse TD and you're boosting it quickly up a sand dune, you've got your oxy or your map gas at full heat on a piece of steel for 6 seconds, it's not going to get that steel that hot. If we have that map gas on half heat for 3 minutes towing a heavy trailer, whether it be a boat trailer or something that's 3 ton and it's only 150 horse, there's going to be far more combustion chamber heat generated from that long duty cycle. It's going to cause more damage, more load on the cooling system and whatnot. So your application is very important. If we tune a 1KD or certain vehicles that are indirect injected ones, we tune them very lean and lesser power when they're towing heavy rates. So maybe 22 to 1 AFR and a lesser boost level to if you're just having a party bus. So keep that in mind when you're going to do your modifications, how much what you want to spend, how much you rely on that vehicle. We get a lot of guys wanting 1,000 Newton meter cruiser builds. They can be relatively reliable, but don't be surprised if you go through 3 gearboxes, and if you rely on that vehicle all day every day and you're wanting to do hundreds of thousands of hassle-free Ks, a lot of mod structure, whether it just be intercooler upgrades, exhaust, moderate tunes at lower boost levels. I've got a friend of mine doing a caravan trip around Australia. His cruiser's running 18 to 1, under 20 pound boost, around 18 PSI, and he's probably knocking on a very high GVM loading. So versus a single cab that's a weekend overlanding toy, we could push that a lot harder with that same setup and get a better torque and power result, because we know the duty cycle isn't as hard. So you just got to take these things into consideration and be realistic. Some people will overmarket the product with these high outputs. I'm very realistic because just the failures we've seen over long periods of time. So the lesser pressure you put on everything, the lesser torque and power and boost levels and everything like that, the more longevity you will likely get within reason. And just be realistic about getting all that maintenance out the way first, regardless of the motor and everything's up to everything. If you've got an auto and it's a 25-year-old car and you're running 750 Newton meters and it's unrebuilt, there's no two ways about it, that auto life will be reduced. The rear diff's got to put out with that torque output. It's the whole entire package you've got to take into consideration.